We're going to delve into the use of hypnosis by law enforcement agencies, something we haven't touched on before in any way. We're going to talk about how it's used with both victims and witnesses to crime and how to help them recall forgotten information. Our guest, Inspector Marx Howell, is a well-known and respected authority on this topic.
So many of us are fascinated with TV shows like CSI, Criminal Minds, and more. Our curiosity of how pure science can solve crimes is insatiable. But how and when does hypnosis come into play? What exactly are the appropriate applications of hypnosis in forensics?
Inspector Marx Howell is a recognized expert in the forensic application of hypnosis, that's police use of hypnosis, and criminal personality profiling. Marx has provided training in hypnosis and criminal investigative analysis to numerous law enforcement personnel throughout the United States. He is a 32-year veteran of the Texas State Police, a graduate of the FBI National Academy. He served in the United States Marine Corps and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice.
The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled hypnotically refreshed recall is admissible in all 50 states when used in criminal case by defense attorneys. Inspector Howell, welcome to the show.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Would you start us off by describing the different applications of hypnosis?
As you well know, there's basically 4 applications to hypnosis. The clinical or therapeutic application, and self-hypnosis, where people use it for self-improvement goals, and then, of course, forensic or investigative hypnosis, where it's used to help people recall information that they know, but they just can't recall it. And then, of course, the 4th application that a lot of people will be familiar with is the stage hypnosis, and in that context, it's primarily for entertainment purposes. When you look at sort of the history of hypnosis, hypnosis has been used since about the mid-50s, sporadically and occasionally by police and defense attorneys, but, and of course, Dr. Martin Reiser started the first formalized forensic hypnosis program with the Los Angeles Police Department. He was doing some hypnosis, and it just got to be such a load. He developed a test project and trained some officers, detectives, and they started using it. Then, of course, the Texas State Police followed suit, and we started developing our program in 1979. Actually, Texas, when you look at our program, we started working on it in 1979 and launched it in 1980. We were using it in criminal investigations. And a lot of people were getting trained in hypnosis over those years. In 1987, I actually, when I was with the state police, I did a research project and identified over 850 Texas police officers that were trained in the forensic application of hypnosis, and there was a case. It was a murder case that occurred in 1967 in Austin, and 13 years later, the state police was asked to do a hypnosis session with a couple of witnesses and did an artist composite sketch, and they picked the suspect out, or they did an artist composite sketch and then picked the suspect out of a photo lineup. And that case was the Zany case, Z-A-N-I, and he was convicted, and it went through all the appellate processes in Texas, and the conviction was upheld, and they established specific safeguards that we must follow if as a prerequisite to admissibility of a person's testimony that's hypnotized in Texas. So that helped professionalize the use of it. The court will look at the level of training in clinical and forensic hypnosis of the officer who's conducting the interview. The interview will have to be recorded from hello to goodbye. You must document every single thing that the victim or witness knows prior to the hypnosis session, so you can distinguish between what was the initial memory and compared to what was recalled while the person is hypnotized. And then, of course, there has to be corroboration. Hypnotic or refresh recall standing alone is not sufficient. You've got to have other corroborating information, and it all has to be documented in paperwork, and you know where the session was and who all was present, and it's got to be free of leading suggestions. And those are just a few of the safeguards that we must follow. And the policeman that's doing the hypnosis cannot know very much about the case. He can only know what type of case it was, where it occurred, and the date and time. And that way, any of the information that comes out is from the witness or the victim. The state police actually did 1,187 hypnosis sessions.
That's amazing.
That sounds like a lot, but that's only about 100 a year. Of course, we had 24 hypnotists, where different ones were doing it. But 25% of the time we got no additional new information. And 75% of the time we got additional information. We talked about 75% of the time we do hypnosis, you will get additional information above and beyond what the person recalled in using standard interview techniques. Now, here's what that means. You may get minuscule information, or you may get a lot. Mm-hmm. But when you do, you don't get information every time, new information. You may get accurate information, inaccurate, or a combination of both. So it's not a cure-all. It's not a silver bullet. It's not the answer to every question. Sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't. What we use hypnosis for is to help refresh somebody's memory. Not make their memory better, but refresh their memory of something they knew, but they can't recall it. And a lot of people experience that. I mean, some people get up out of a chair and go in another room and forget what they went in there for. That happens to a lot of us. And if you go back and sit down in that chair, you're more likely to recall it, because we're talking about state-dependent memory. But when we are looking at using hypnosis in the police field, we're primarily going to use it with victims and witnesses that have been traumatized. And I mean, that's not the sole use. I mean, we'll use it with victims who are not traumatized. But when a person is traumatized, the research is pretty clear that trauma, anxiety, and stress interrupts people's memory. And people repress those horrible memories, like the female victim of a sexual assault or somebody that's been robbed and beaten up. And we use it to bypass that amnesia, because we use specific techniques to hopefully help the person isolate the emotions that are attached to that crime event at the time the information was being encoded. So you want to try to isolate those emotions and where they can recall the information in a safe and secure setting. So that's one thing. Then some of the other really, well-known cases where it was used, a lot of people may not remember that hypnosis was, in fact, used in the John Kennedy assassination. There was a federal judge in San Antonio, John Wood, who was assassinated.
Yes, I know the case. Yes.
Used it in that case. As a matter of fact, they also used hypnosis in serial killer Ted Bundy's case.
Know that either.
When he abducted Kimberly Leach down in Florida, and they had a witness that saw a man in a white van, and they hypnotized that witness. And of course, it was used in the Boston Strangler case, and that's Albert DeSalvo, and of course the Chowchilla case. And there's quite a few others, but those are some of the best-known cases where it was used. And in the use of hypnosis, you have to be very careful and not lead the person, allowing them to report in free narrative and only recalling, the information and telling you the information that they recall. Actually, we only use it with witnesses and victims because a person can lie while they're hypnotized, as y'all well know.
Right.
But you have to be very careful with any eyewitness testimony, and there's a lot of research, and there's been a lot of failures in the criminal justice system where people were convicted and incarcerated strictly based on eyewitness testimony, and then later on DNA cleared them, which is, just a tragedy for those people's lives. That's why hypnotically refreshed recall standing alone is not sufficient to even arrest anybody, and it shouldn't be.
You have to have corroborating evidence.
On the one hand, a witness speaking from their conscious mind on the witness stand may completely get things wrong and be an unreliable witness. But I would imagine that under hypnosis, with the proper approach, you could get that person to refresh their memory and it would be accurate. But on the other hand, we also know that people can, without any leading from you and with you taking the utmost care, people can still create a false memory on their own. So what criteria do the courts have with accepting? I know they accept the testimony, but how do they decide what to use?
When you use hypnosis, it's not any different than not using hypnosis when you're interviewing someone. You can get accurate information, or you can get inaccurate information, or you can get a combination of both. And that's why you need cooperation. And that's why that's why the Texas appellate courts established the 10 procedural safeguards, and that's why we require policemen to have training in hypnosis before they go out there and use these techniques, to sort of professionalize it and reduce the probability of that happening. Could it happen? It's more likely to happen if you don't use proper techniques than it is if you use proper techniques. But there's still another factor involved, and that is related to the technique, because we have to use neutral, non-leading questions. And let me just give you a couple examples. If a witness tells you that the person that did the crime has a mustache, you would ask them to describe the person starting at the top of the head. And if they tell you they have a mustache, and you would then ask them a question like, well, describe the mustache. Then, after they describe it, you can use what we call compound questions and ask them, is it light, medium, or thick? So you have to be very careful and use specific strategies and techniques not to contaminate that memory. Because if somebody goes and robs somebody, let's say it's a woman with a gun, and, what did the woman have the gun in her left hand? See, that would be a mildly leading question. You don't want to do that. Trying to figure out handedness. So using proper techniques plus following the guidelines, that improves the integrity of the hypnosis session, and recording it either on audio or video where people, from hello to goodbye.
So obviously what we're hearing is that hypnosis is used to support a case or corroborate a case, but not to prove that there's a lot of other components to the case. Police don't use hypnosis for every crime. What kind of cases would they automatically go to use hypnosis?
The thing about it is, and another factor involved is light, time, and distance, and then visual acuity. Let's say a person is out in their front yard and they witness something that occurred 100 yards down their street. If it's dark at night, what are they likely to see? Not much. If the person is daylight and they have 2200 vision and their glasses are at the optometrist shop getting repaired, would they likely see something they could describe? Probably not, without wearing their glasses.
Right.
So light, time, and distance has an impact on it. So when you talk about the criteria, primarily with cases where you don't have any suspects, and the person had the opportunity to see the offender, had the time to do it, had the visual acuity and all of that, and just can't remember much information because they were startled and surprised, and they were fearful and terrorized because the person had a gun, then that would be a case that you would consider using hypnosis. Oh. But, when I'm talking about time, light, and distance, or light, time, and distance, there's a possibility that if you had a person who was inside of a house, and I'll take the female victim of a sexual assault and all the lights out, somebody breaks in and sexually assaults that person without ever turning the lights on, you could still possibly use hypnosis to assist you in recalling what the person said to them, recalling the texture of the clothing, if the person had contact with the offender's clothing or with the body, if there's any marks or scars. Matter of fact, we had a case like that where a victim recalled a scar on a person's shoulder, and when they caught him, he actually did have a scar on his top of his collarbone there. So you don't just have to have light. July 3rd, 1983, Vicki Rock and her husband Frank were having an argument. And they were arguing about wanting to move and about, whether they were going to eat pizza for supper that night. And during this argument, she picked a gun up and ended up shooting and killing Frank, her husband. And she called the police on the telephone and told them they had to hurry up and get out there, that she just shot her husband. Well, they subsequently arrested her, and her attorneys hired a lady by the name of Dr. Betty Back to conduct a hypnosis session with her. Matter of fact, she hypnotized her twice. After the hypnosis session, she remembered that her finger was not on the trigger when that gun fired. And, of course, everybody said, yeah, that's right. Sure, you can remember that. They got a well-known gun expert to check that gun. It was one of those little cheap 22s, what they call a Saturday night special.
Yeah, that's special, yeah.
You could hit it on the side, and it would actually fire. So they went to court. At that time, they didn't allow the use of hypnosis. Was not admissible in Arkansas, and they tried to introduce it. They convicted her and gave her 10 years. And she filed an appeal to the Arkansas Supreme Court. They upheld the conviction. And then they filed a petition for review before the United States Supreme Court, and they actually reviewed that case and reversed her conviction. And they ruled that a defendant can use hypnosis retrieve memories in their trial. They said at the time that this is a narrowly defined opinion, that we think the courts ought to consider guidelines for using it with witnesses and victims. So that was a really leading case that actually helped us in the hypnosis community, especially in Texas, because hypnosis is legal in some states and some states that is not legal in.
Is it ever admissible in other types of cases, like civil cases?
It is. There's some very interesting cases where it's used in civil cases. Weiler versus Fairchild Hiller Corporation was a helicopter crash where they used hypnosis in it. There's a case on a product liability. It was used where the brakes had failed on a vehicle. So there's been some civil cases, including car accidents where two cars crashed together to try to refresh memories. There is a lot of crime victims and crime victims' families who, they've had a family member murdered or injured or something that happened years ago. And they're now using it more in cold cases than they were in the past, because they'll go back and find witnesses and hypnotize them, see if they can call additional information. But I work on a cold case review team and have since '85, and I get several requests from around the United States where other agencies are working on a cold case that call and ask me questions about the possibility of hypnotizing a person or getting a person hypnotized. And some family members are now going to police. I've done 4 or 5 cases for other police agencies in other states where the family member requested hypnosis, and that police agency hired me to come in there and conduct a hypnosis session for them. And but I did hypnosis a couple of years ago in a death case that occurred in 1947. The 3 people that I hypnotized were over 80 years of age.
Oh, my word.
And I've done hypnosis with a hearing-impaired person using a signer, a juvenile that was abducted. I hypnotized a lady who was 100 years and 1 month old when she got sexually assaulted.
Oh, my God.
And she only was taking 1 aspirin a day. Lived by herself and still walked to the grocery store and got her groceries. I've had fortunate to do hypnosis with a television station in Japan on crime victims, and with some Japanese victims that speak no English using an interpreter. And as a matter of fact, about last year, I guess it was, I got a court order. I normally do not hypnotize defendants, but they called me to hypnotize a female serial killer, and the defense called me, and I told them, no, I'm not interested in. They kept on and on. I said, the only way I'd do it is with a court order. And they went to the court and got a court order, her authorizing her to be hypnotized and specifying that I'd be the one to do it. So I worked with her with hypnosis. And one other case was where I hypnotized a girl who was 10 years old, and she was 3 years and 10 months old when her grandmother and aunt got murdered. And this was a Florida case. And she actually walked over there to the window and looked at us when the offender was leaving, and he got in a green car, and she told him when she was 3 years and 10 months old it was a green car. But when she's looking out the window describing it, she says it has double tint on it. And so anyway, the captain there asked me later on, said, what's this double tint business? I said, well, I don't know. Somebody may have contaminated her memory. 6 weeks later, not as a result of the hypnosis, they identified the person who killed these 2 women. And he was incarcerated in Wisconsin. The prosecutors up there still had the green Thunderbird that he was driving at the time that they tried him for killing his mother. They went up there, and he called me back, and he said, "You're not going to believe it. This car has limo tint on the windows. How did she know that?" I said, "I don't know how she knew it. I guess it's sort of like, you know, when a little baby says, 'Mama, Mama, Mama,' and they don't know what that means, but later on they assign meaning to it." I said, "I guess she saw the dark windows, and later on she and her family was driving down the street. Somebody said, 'That car has double tint on it.'" But this girl was almost a prodigy child. I tell you, she was very smart. So those are sort of some of the unusual and interesting cases.
I'm wondering if there are hypnotists that are listening and they're interested in doing this sort of work and they want to go and get certified training for it. Is this something that you would advise people to do where they just add it on to their other services they do? And that would be almost dabbling. Would you advise people that this is something that they would want to really invest themselves in and do as a full-time occupation?
Absolutely. They can either do one of two things. They can add hypnosis to their pre-existing counseling skills, or they can go out there and get trained and certified in using hypnosis. And, you know, that would make it certainly more credible. And there's some people who make a full-time living in hypnosis, some people who just practice part-time in conjunction with another job that they have, practice at night and on the weekend. And then there's some people who just are sort of, you know, interested in hypnosis and using self-hypnosis for improvement goals.
Right.
See, when you talk about police being a hypnotist, and we require 50 hours of training in it, but what people need to understand, we're adding that to our pre-existing skills. Right. And all policemen that have a lot of training. They'll have 1,500, 2,000 hours of training in hostage negotiation, interview, interrogation, working with the mentally ill, and things like that. So you're adding this to your pre-existing skills. You know, some people say police shouldn't be using hypnosis because they're not trained in how to handle traumatized victims. But the fact of the matter is, we handle a lot of traumatized victims when you go out to notify people at night that their daughter's been killed in a car wreck, and people having an ab reaction is not a hypnosis issue.
No.
Because you can go to any one of the funerals in the United States today, over 5,000 funerals in the United States today, and there were people out there ab-reacting, crying because grandmother died and all that, and other people putting their arms around their shoulders and reassuring them and all of that, and giving them comfortable, confident suggestions of everything's going to be okay. So, you know, it's not a hypnosis issue, a person having an emotional ab-reaction or
not at all.
outburst.
No. So the bottom line is it always goes back to training, and you can feel completely confident doing it, whether you're doing it on a part-time or a full-time basis. It goes back to training, and what people are going to be looking at is who trained you, how highly trained are you, and continuing education.
Right, continuing. I've got over 1,500 hours of training, but that's by far exceeds the standards that's required here in Texas. But it's because I helped set the program up and trained our people, and I still train the state police and the Texas Rangers and city police officers and deputy sheriffs in the forensic application of hypnosis.
Inspector Howell, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for sharing all of this really valuable information with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed it myself. And if I can ever help somebody, tell them get on my website, give me a call. I'll try to assist them if I can.